and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And the big stories do keep coming here at Gay USA.
By the time you see this, you should know that our representatives in Congress, in the Senate and House, have introduced a new Equality Act. We've been telling you this was coming for a long time. It is meant to be a comprehensive bill for LGBT rights across the board. We'll give you the details as our top story tonight.
But in the meantime, since we last met, the federal EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, has ruled that discrimination based on sexual orientation is sex discrimination and therefore is illegal across the country.
So that's going to help if we don't get this other bill immediately, which we certainly don't expect.
Well, you never know.
But meanwhile, the Republicans in Congress have their own schemes to thwart us, and we're waiting to see whether Mitch McConnell will allow a vote on something what are they calling this? The Religious Freedom...
First Amendment.
First Amendment Defense Act. So we'll update you on that.
Which is a religious exemption act.
Yeah.
And we're going to update you about how the presidential hopefuls are addressing LGBT rights.
Do we get to talk about Donald Trump in that?
If you like.
Okay. In Tampa, Florida, India Clarke becomes the 10th transgender woman murdered in the U.S. this year that we know about.
And a lesbian in Brooklyn was beaten by cops, and then they charged her with assault.
Shameful. A major party candidate for president of Uganda comes out for gay rights.
A male Methodist minister in Michigan, it's alliterative, is forced out for having a male partner.
And the long-awaited reality show on the E! Network about Caitlyn Jenner, I Am Kate, starts this weekend.
Now, I'm old enough to remember when Bella Abzug and Ed Koch introduced an amendment to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. They did this in about 1973 to amend the Civil Rights Act to add sexual orientation.
Yep.
And I didn't realize that Bella called it the Equality Act. Well, that's what they want to call it again, folks. And it is an amendment to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 covering housing, jobs, schools, public accommodations, being introduced by Representative David Cicilline of Rhode Island and Senator Jeff Merkel of Oregon. And it adds sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, and national origin, apparently, and expands public accommodations coverage in the law.
Well, what it does is it changes a lot of acts. It doesn't just supplement the 64 Civil Rights Act. It goes around and picks all the non-discrimination laws and adds us and others where necessary to these laws. It really is a comprehensive analysis of what each of these laws lacks.
Because shockingly, sex wasn't covered in some categories.
And public accommodations isn't in all these bills. So they've really taken their time. People have wondered why it was taking so long to introduce this bill. And the answer is that they have really looked at the situation with national non-discrimination laws, figured out where the holes are, and tried to plug them all in one big comprehensive bill. So, yes, introduced by Merkel in the Senate with co-sponsors there. We're taping Wednesday afternoon. The introduction is Thursday. You'll see this after the introduction. We'll have more analysis next week of who the co-sponsors are. At this moment, we're not expecting any Republicans to sign on, but that could change by the time it's introduced.
And that's an element of some controversy. And you have the log cabin saying, well, this just seems to be a Democrat bill to show up Republicans. And we're saying, sign on to the bill.
Well, Gregory Angelo, the head of the Log Cabin Republicans, put out a statement that basically said, you wrote this bill without the input of Republicans, and therefore you have sabotaged the process by not being inclusive from the beginning, because now you won't get Republicans bought into this process, you won't get Republicans signing on, and therefore you won't pass this bill.
And the problem with getting a lot of Republican, not all Republican, but getting a lot of Republican buy-in in the past was, well, we're not doing it unless you exempt this. They want to exempt the Boy Scouts.
Right.
You don't need to exempt the Boy Scouts anymore, pretty much, et cetera. I mean, we want religious exemptions, and we're not putting up with that anymore.
No. We want the same thing across the board in all these laws, and there are small, restricted religious exemptions in some of these bills, and there are laws that say you can't make a church or a synagogue or a mosque hire people who do not conform to their faith tenets, whether that's women or gay people or whatever.
You may have noticed that the Catholic Church does not ordain women and has not had to under the laws forbidding sex discrimination all these years.
Exactly.
But speaking of Get Equal and getting equal, Get Equal, the group that's worked on this for a long time, seems unhappy with the fact that this is largely an amendment to the Civil Rights Act of '64. They wanted a separate bill that included a lot of other things that are not going to be in the bill that are on our agenda in terms of helping detainees and people in detention and all those kinds of things.
Well, there are several objections from Get Equal, some of which I think are potentially valid and some seem more pie in the sky. Let's take one step back. The bill that has been on the table for some years in various forms was the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, ENDA, which unfortunately some politicians are still talking about, and even some other leaders. We killed that bill last year, and we killed it because it did apply only to jobs and because it had this enormous religious exemption written into it. So as we were in the process of killing it, and by we I mean activists who then talked to the national organizations, who got to the politicians and said, we are getting off this, we no longer support it, and it died. But the conversation has been about, all right, well, what do we want and what does it look like? And most importantly, how are we going to do this? Are we going to write a standalone bill that is new, that will accomplish what we want? Or are we going to go and try to insert sexual orientation and gender identity into the Civil Rights Act? Are we going to amend things that already exist? Which is more likely to be appealing to the majority of members of Congress? Which has the best chance of success? Which makes the most sense? Which is going to get the most support from activist communities all over whose support we need?
Because there is some hesitation on the part of some civil rights groups about going into the Civil Rights Act, and they're hesitating on this bill, but most of them are on board.
Well, the fear is that if you take a bill to the floor of the Senate that says we want to amend the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that Ted Cruz and Rand Paul will stand up and say, well, great, we want to amend the Civil Rights Act of '64 too, and we want to get rid of this and this and this.
Let them try it.
And we have a majority of in the Senate, and we can do all that, and it will turn into absolute chaos and horror.
Well, obviously, since there seems to be a growing consensus around this bill, those arguments must have been hashed out and they're past it.
Certainly, as we see it being introduced, I'm very, very curious about how this bill is going to be analyzed and received once it is introduced tomorrow as we tape.
I mean, I think it's a long-term, we said in the beginning it's unlikely to pass in this Congress, but and it's seen as a long-term project, but of course the country is getting on board with LGBT rights. And, we've had polls that say 80% of Americans support employment protections, for instance.
Well, one of the fascinating things is the way the Supreme Court marriage decision has put jet propulsion behind this concept of comprehensive civil rights, whether it is doing it in states that don't have it yet. And please feel free in the 28 states that do not have non-discrimination protections to go ahead and work for that in your state.
By the way, if you'd like to work for that in your area, there's a new group called Freedom for All Americans, which is working on all this. It's a bipartisan campaign for equal protection under the law for LGBT people, including in the States. And they're running something called LGBT University to train the next generation of movement leaders to do this work. And you can go to their website at freedomforallamericans.org and learn how you can sign up for training if that's what you want to do. And we know you're watching us from all over the country, so here's your chance.
Yeah, so now...
And you don't have to go to university to do it, you can just do it.
So we're totally in favor of this comprehensive bill. The other things that Get Equal wants are things like having the bill cover the poor treatment of LGBT asylum seekers in detention. And I just don't see how they're going to do that in a bill like this. But it is, let me give you the whole list. This bill covers credit, education, employment, housing, jury service, federal funding, and public accommodations. So it's quite a list, but I think there are some things it can't do. So we'll see. I suspect we'll all end up behind this.
So far,
I mean, so.
Well, this is what we fought for, and you and Queer Nation fought for.
Yes, and many, 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 many others.
Absolutely.
But we are not unrealistic, and even as we see our the movement for our rights accelerate, we understand that we do face a Republican Congress that doesn't want to do this. That every week we come here and talk about the heinous things they do in the Congress.
Well, let's talk about those before
things.
We get to the EEOC. Let's talk about because these are congressional actions.
All right.
So this First Amendment Defense Act that is being fast-tracked, it looks like, in the House and maybe in the Senate.
Well, I would say the more we talk about our comprehensive bill, the more it fuels the right wing to pass their bill.
It's an initial response to the marriage decision.
Yeah.
It would bar the federal government from revoking tax exemptions or denying benefits because an individual or an organization believes marriage should be reserved for, sex discordant couples, for heterosexual couples. So that's the essence of that. And then there's a bill being proposed by Charlie Dent, a Republican from Texas, I believe.
Yeah.
He says, don't go that far. You don't want to be like Indiana. You're just going to make our party look even worse. So I want to do a thing where we give them housing rights and we give them employment rights, but we get a lot of these religious exemptions that we've always sought. And he says, I'm even willing to work with the Human Rights Campaign on it, he said. He was met with silence in the caucus when he did this, but... Yeah,
because it's too liberal for the Republican caucus.
But
here's one, I just wanted one warning. They're going to sell these bills as, and they've been selling them in the States too, as we must make sure that no minister is forced to conduct a wedding for a same-sex couple.
Never been true.
But what's really in the bill is this exemption for businesses to accommodate same-sex couples or gay people or transgender people. So watch out for the Trojan horse here. It's not about ministers, it's about businesses.
And Senator Mitch McConnell in the Senate, leader of the Senate, won't rule out a floor vote on the religious freedom bill, which would enable all this anti-gay discrimination. And it would also lead to bias against things like people like single moms and unmarried couples who people might have religious objections to.
It gives people carte blanche to forget about any kind of non-discrimination rules. Now,
and there's another bill to allow discrimination by federal contractors with religious objections, sponsored by John McCain, Tim Scott, and Rand Paul.
To overrule, I thought that was part of the First Amendment Defense Act. Yes, McCain is now signed on to this.
Yes.
The great war hero.
No, I hate to say who you're sounding like now.
I have to say.
Go ahead.
Horrible as he is.
Yeah.
Donald Trump. It is tickling my fancy that he is so upsetting the other Republican candidates.
Well, if you wanted to hear some of them called idiots, you'd have to watch this show. But
we beat him to the punch.
Yeah.
But because we call them idiots, it warms my heart to hear him call them idiots. But I would have to call him an idiot also.
he is something. I don't walk into buildings with the Trump name on them, and that's been true for 20 years. I don't know why people are still just catching on to this. And the New York City was doing all these co-projects with him, golf courses and parks and carousels, all these places I can no longer use.
The New York Times did a piece today about how great it is to live in his buildings and how well run they are.
Oh, God.
But let's get back to...
Why shouldn't they be great? He gets huge tax breaks, so he can afford
We
services.
are bearing the lead because as we talk about these bills that may or may not happen in the near or distant future, something real happened last week that was extremely important.
You have new rights protections that you did not have before. So this is what we're going to talk about.
We hope.
Well, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission ruled 3-2 that sexual orientation discrimination is barred under existing federal law, banned by Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which bans sex discrimination. Now, they applied this to transgender discrimination 3 years ago.
In the Macy decision in
unanimous
2012,
decision.
yes,
So,
that was unanimous.
Now, these things are subject to court interpretation. If an employer loses at the EEOC, they can say, I don't think we're covered under sex discrimination, and the courts could sort that out. Some federal courts already have ruled that sexual orientation discrimination is sex discrimination.
And some have rejected that analysis. So this is not entirely firm footing yet, but to have this decision come out of the EEOC, led by lesbian Hy Feldblum, who is a legendary, brilliant lawyer and is doing a fantastic job at the EEOC as an Obama appointee. But what the decision of the commission said is that by definition, if you discriminate against someone, and this was a case of an air traffic controller who said he was denied promotion because he's gay, if you are discriminating against someone for being gay, it is by definition sex discrimination because you are saying because they are involved with, attracted to, whatever, someone of the same sex as opposed to someone of the opposite sex, you are discriminating on the basis of sex.
Exactly. That's what they ruled.
Yeah.
Now, Hy Feldblum does say that you should still engage, the EEOC can't help everyone. You should find a lawyer when you have a discrimination case. And I used to be on the Human Rights Commission in New York, and people would call me and try to tell me about the complaints. I said, find a private lawyer who will evaluate your case and see whether you can prove it and all those kinds of, because it's very hard to go forward with these things.
EEOC cases are notoriously slow, too. I think they've dealt with some of the backlog, but it can take a long time to get a decision out of the EEOC.
But Hy says that you have to file with the EEOC before you go to court if you're going to use this. And she says, we still need a comprehensive civil rights bill. She said, but she also notes that gays have been filing sex discrimination claims since the early 1970s.
And
this is not new.
The EEOC would just, in previous iterations, would laugh people out of the room. Now, as our understanding and analysis has developed, the EEOC is suddenly saying, no, wait a minute, this is sex discrimination. And by the way, in this case of the air traffic controller, they didn't rule in his favor that it was discrimination. What they said was he has the right to sue on the basis of charging sex discrimination. So his case still has to proceed. Now, but he has the right to sue on that basis.
Understand, this is only employment discrimination.
Yes.
That's what the EEOC deals with. Other agencies often look to the EEOC for guidance. So HUD, housing, all the other departments can get on board with this and also declare it to be sex discrimination.
Yes. It's a major ruling. The EEOC did a great thing by doing this. And so if you are feeling discriminated against on the job on the basis of your sexual orientation or gender identity, you have support from the EEOC for an analysis that says that could be sex discrimination, and you should investigate that as a complaint you would file.
But if you're a scout leader You do not have support from Rick Perry and Scott Walker. Rick Perry said the Boy Scouts would be better off without openly gay employees and volunteers, and Scott Walker said he's fine with the old policy, and he doesn't know whether being gay is a choice. That's and he says my wife doesn't really support same-sex marriage, really.
Oh, please! If I had their phone numbers, I would give them to you.
Well, Donald Trump, of course, as you know, gave out Lindsey Graham's phone number this week.
That's why I said it.
Yes.
All right, other news in this area. There's a new act introduced in Congress, the Restore Honor to Service Members Act. Has been reintroduced in the Senate and the House to fix the records of discharged lesbian, gay, bisexual service members and allow them to get benefits since they were discharged before the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. But the mere idea that we're having trouble getting that passed gives you an indication of how long it may take to pass a comprehensive civil rights bill.
I forgot to mention Jeb Bush. He was in San Francisco at a tech group, so more liberal. And he says, well, I don't think you should be discriminated against because of your sexual orientation, period, over and out. Then, he put a few qualifiers in, he said a florist should be, a florist should be obligated to sell you flowers, but not for a same-sex wedding. And asked about legislation versus discrimination, which would be your job as president, he said, oh, that should be done state by state. So
comprehensive civil rights, state by state. Thank you.
It's just, but I think reporters are getting more sophisticated when they ask these questions, and they say, "Oh, wait a minute."
Well, let me give you a good example of a media approach. Because yes, reporters are, and these audiences are. They bring up these questions. You have out gay people in these audiences in the tech rooms in San Francisco who challenge him on this stuff. The Salt Lake Tribune in Salt Lake City, Utah, has endorsed for mayor in the August 11th primary out lesbian Jackie Biskupski, who is a former member of the legislature, now works in the sheriff's office. There are 4 people running for mayor in this primary, and they've endorsed her.
That's fantastic.
Unbelievable.
Wonders never cease.
Yeah.
Maybe the Mormon Church is going to start giving money to gay causes. Oh, no, that happened last week.
All right, and do you want to talk?
And you know, fasten your seatbelts. In San Diego, we have the first high school marching band in the Pride Parade. It draws from many area high schools.
It's a combo.
So they're all implicated. Where are you going to protest, Westboro Baptist Church? There are too many of them.
All right. I think we need to move on to some less uplifting stories and talk about the bad things we've been hearing this week. First of all, from Tampa, Florida.
That's awful.
We, on an almost weekly basis, we have to report the murders of transgender women around the country, particularly transgender women of color. And another one has been found beaten to death. 25 years old, India Clarke. I believe we have a picture of her. There she is. Glowing remembrances from her mother.
Said she was good-hearted and a very loving person. And people with info, by the way, because they don't have a clue on this crime yet, are urged to call the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office.
And I just keep thinking about the fact that these are only the ones we know about.
Well, we didn't talk about, there were 13 in all of last year. There were 10 already this year. But I think we're hearing more about it because in the past, a lot of these people were misidentified, misgendered by the police, and so we never heard about it. Or the family didn't think they were so, think of them highly, so they didn't want to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And that's what's changing, and that's all for the good, of course, and I hope it will bring an end to this reign of terror on trans women.
And of course, some of the reign of terror, as with many people of color around the country, and stories we're hearing everywhere. A woman in Brooklyn, in Flatlands, Brooklyn, was walking down the street.
This is Stephanie Dorsiant, and we have a picture of her as well, 29.
Bumps into a cop, who stops her, yells at her, gay bashes her, beats her up, and arrests her, and she's held for 3 days.
Yeah, I mean, you know, he bumps into her coming out in plain clothes, coming out of the police precinct, and she says, "Damn, dude, where are you going?" It's like, what's going on? It's like, get out of my way. And he calls her an effing piece of shit, dyke. I mean, this is what he says to her, and then punches her in the face, gets her in a chokehold. And she says, "I can't breathe." You'll remember that phrase. And to get loose, she apparently bites him because she's gonna die.
And because he's in plain clothes.
So then all the other cops come out of the precinct, and she says, "I'm saved, I'm saved." No, they push her to the ground, get her handcuffed. She's in Rikers Island for 3 days. I mean, she's walking with her lover. I mean, this story just.
There but for the grace of God goes Stephanie Bland, who is hanging from a plastic bag and dead in the jail and wherever that was.
And then, by the way, the three. Those responsible for gay bashing, what was it, 10 months ago in Philadelphia, that led to facial fractures for one of the victims. They're considering plea deals now. They're facing 34 to 68 years in prison maximum, but some commentators say, well, they're only likely to get 2 to 4 for the person who did the most.
And yet another story of violence from Crown Heights, Brooklyn. This is our third in a couple of weeks. A gay man walking down the street, attacked by some guy who said, "I'm tired of you guys following me." Walking down the street, beaten up.
Well, staying in New York, we had a horrible situation in North Carolina with a founding member of Sparta, one of the service members groups, Tanya Nicole Dunbar. We have a picture of Tanya Nicole Dunbar there. Found dead on Sunday. She was a lesbian in the Army. There was no foul play suspected here. She apparently fell and hit her head. She was married with 2 kids, and she'd gone camping alone on a beach in South Carolina. Her wife, Dee Graham Dunbar, is a co-founder of Military Partners and Family Coalition. It's just a very sad story.
Sad.
All right.
And we'll note another death, Paul Gebhardt, 98.
Yeah, 98.
Kinsey researcher for 36 years. He was played by Timothy Hutton in the movie Kinsey. He thinks he sort of got a raw deal there, that they lionized Kinsey and made him look like a cad. I don't remember the movie well enough. But he was the co-author of Sexual Behavior in the Human Female.
1953.
If you go online to the Kinsey Institute site, you can see little snippets of an interview with him. We were listening to some of it before we came on the air, and he's just hilarious, talking about things like the Kinsey scale, and and the story about how when he first met Kinsey.
Yes.
And Kinsey said something like, "How'd you get here?" And I came through Grand Central. Did you notice anything there? No. So Kinsey takes him back to Grand Central and takes him to the men's room and points out all the guys cruising each other.
Yes, we did. But his initial reaction to homosexuality, which they saw a lot of, was, that probably should be avoided. It's a very difficult life, is kind of the way he approached it. But in the end, he was a supporter of same-sex marriage. And he said that Kinsey, and obviously his greatest contribution, was making it possible to talk about sex in the living room. Before, you could barely talk about it in the bedroom.
Yeah. And he also, in these little video snippets, tells a cute story about being very friendly with Del Martin and Phyllis Lyon, the famous lesbian couple. And that they gave him a little certificate that made him not a daughter of Bilitis, but a son of Bilitis.
What he calls bilitis.
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 Yeah.
All right. Going back to New York and Italy, Mayor de Blasio is continuing to do his best to tear down the wall of the separation between church and state. He's got a new clergy council, which does include lesbian Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum, but he called the Pope, get this, the leading voice on this earth in the fight against inequality. Excuse me? A guy who heads a church where women can't have jobs, where open gay people are thrown out? I mean, it's just outrageous that he's not even thinking about these things. And now he's at the Vatican for a climate change meeting.
Well, you know, he's been crusading de Blasio and the Pope about income inequality, and I'm happy they're doing that.
Yes, but who's following the Pope on that? I mean, and I mean this seriously.
Yeah.
If a corporate chieftain said, a Catholic, said, Holy Father, you're right. I've been cheating people. I'm going to start, sharing the wealth. I haven't heard any of that. And then the Pope's going to come to New York, and a million people will turn out in Philadelphia and New York. And it's like, what are they showing up for? Are they really responding to these messages that sound very nice?
Celebrity.
It's just like kids going to see Santa Claus.
Mm-hmm.
They don't care what he says. They just want to see the suit.
Yeah. And be promised eternal life.
Anyway, but the mayor said it was fun even to be close to him. His voice is so inspirational.
Meanwhile, in Cassopolis, Michigan, a Methodist church there has forced the out gay Reverend Benjamin Hutchison to resign because he married his partner. The congregation is upset. The community is upset because this guy has done wonders in reviving the church there and bringing people into it and getting them involved. But no, he married his male partner, so he's out.
They do have these welcoming congregations.
Isn't Hillary a big Methodist?
Yes.
Let's ask her about this stuff.
So's my sister-in-law.
Yeah.
Police in Stockton, California, Police Lieutenant Toby Will, who wrote this virulently anti-gay letter in the paper about the vile passions of gay people. Well, the police chief said he doesn't represent the department and he has been placed on administrative leave. Well, it's very similar to the situation with the fire chief in Atlanta, who was fired for saying similar things, who was suing to get his job back.
Well, this guy in California signed the letter with his name and his police affiliation.
And he insisted on that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Meanwhile, on the other side of the coin, in Franklin Township, New Jersey, the president of the Board of Ed is a gay man, Ed Potosnak, and he gave the speech at the Franklin High School graduation ceremony and talked about how great it was that marriage equality had been legalized by the Supreme Court. Well, one of his fellow school board members is not happy about this and is raising a stink about it. But generally, he seems to have gotten a lot of support.
Now, that Arkansas law which bans localities from doing laws that go beyond the state has gone into effect, but 3 counties are refusing to drop their ordinances. Little Rock, Hot Springs, and Pulaski County. Eureka Springs is undecided. The Attorney General has not clarified whether this law applies to the gay rights laws, and the family council there in Arkansas says they're going to sue to make sure it's enforced. Let's talk about Kevin Cathcart for a second. Kevin Cathcart has been the executive director of the Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund for 24 years. There he is. That's kind of a record. It's almost as long as I've been here, but I'm not the executive director. Anyway, he, obviously presided over it during this tremendous period of growth, and I don't know what he's moving on to, but he's not leaving until April.
You're the co-executive producer along with me.
Yes.
We don't have any bosses.
In the beginning, we had Lou as the boss.
Oh, okay. Not anymore.
Right.
He also ran did you just say gay and lesbian advocates and defenders in Boston for 8 years before that. When he came, there were 21 employees at Lambda. Now there are over 100.
Wow.
He's expanded it from 2 offices to 5. Lambda was very involved, of course, in the Romer v. Evans case, the Lawrence v. Texas case, the Obergefell case, just now the marriage case at the Supreme Court, AIDS issues, gay students who were bullied, Margaret Kammermeyer, and there's a big transgender case in Georgia they did. Yes. Lambda is a fundamentally important organization to our community, and Kevin has been running it for a long time, and I can appreciate his desire to move on and thank him for his service.
Thank you, Kevin. Not serving so long is Governor Kate Brown of Oregon, who was thrust into the office when the former governor was resigned in a scandal. There was a feature story on her that says, when I came in, everything was bisexual governor. And I wrestled with how much that would define me, she said. But then she got a letter from a teen who had been suicidal, but found hope after reading about her. And she said,
Don't we have a picture of her?
Yeah, Kate Brown. She said, if I can save one kid's life for me, it's absolutely worth it. There she is.
Thank you, Kate.
Very nice
Brown.
Person.
Thank you, Governor Brown.
New York State Education Department has instituted guidance on how to help transgenders kids in the schools. The only thing I'm concerned about is that they're not mandating a lot of things in terms of training. They're suggesting a lot of things.
New York is so far behind. Many, many, many states have done this before and done it better. Caitlyn Jenner on the ESPYs. She did a good job.
Yes, she did. It was quite a long piece, so a lot of people were getting an education that night.
Yes, I mean...
and the speech had a very activist tinge to it, I think.
And I thought they did a great setup video piece to introduce her that took us through her journey and transition in a few minutes, and that was very well done. And Abby Wambach introduced her and, from the soccer team and out lesbian, and that was terrific. So that I thought was a very positive experience in that context, in that place.
Right.
The ESPY Awards is the sports crowd.
Jocks.
Yeah. So that was great. And TLC is canceling the Duggars, 19 kids and counting, and will do, because of their son who molested. We talk about them because they're so anti-gay and so
they're crusaders
on their high horse about stuff. They are going to do an hour on child molestation.
And stuff's working itself out about the clerks around the country who are suing to not have to do marriages. In Utah, a federal judge ordered the state to put same-sex couples on the birth certificate and says that the state is discriminating. And by the way, there was just a ruling from the court of the appellate court in New York about someone who wrote a will trying to leave something to his close friend, who was his partner, and didn't write it. He wrote it himself, and as a result, the person's not getting most of it, even in Manhattan, because you have to write the will very carefully for this to happen. He said, I'm going to give, it's a long story. You can look it up if you like. I thought it was fascinating. But write a will, use a lawyer, it helps.
And one area of concern, the ERISA law, the federal insurance thing that has allowed companies, self-insured companies have gotten out of giving health insurance benefits to same-sex partners for years before marriage was legal. By saying, well, we're not subject to state laws where marriage has become legal because we're federally self-insured. Well, it turns out that that may still be the case because there is no federal law that prohibits sexual orientation discrimination. So even though you may be legally married, it doesn't mean that a federal insurance program is mandated to cover you. And unless this new EEOC ruling is brought into effect and it's declared sex discrimination.
We hope so.
Another reason we need a comprehensive law.
International news.
Yes.
We've got a lot coming out of Africa. The president's going to be over there, and of course, people are wondering whether he's going to talk about gay rights again. An activist, lesbian from Senegal, said he was a little too blunt last time, and it fell on us after he left. Others say this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We need to hear him.
It's always a debate.
It is a debate.
Meanwhile, you remember we had the activist woman, absolutely fantastic, from Uganda here a couple of weeks ago. And what she told us was that, off camera, was that the U.S. LGBT envoy, Randy Berry, was headed to Uganda. And in fact, he has been now and has held meetings with government representatives there, kind of quietly.
Being a little mum about it.
The idea that you could work with the current government of Uganda to make any advances for LGBT people is an astonishing
We just heard about 6 gay men there who were outed and now have to go into hiding or leave the country.
Right.
So but here's a ray of hope, and she told us about this too. She told about this guy, presidential candidate Amama Mbazazi, 66 years old. He's a former prime minister of the country. He says, quote, homosexuals are not the biggest threat to our society. I am opposed to homophobia. There shouldn't be any discrimination. That's a big one, folks.
Yeah, but he's the former prime minister because the current president got rid of him.
Well, he does believe that marriage is between a man and a woman, but he says homosexuality is not something new. That's a big breakthrough for Uganda.
Well, here's another big potential breakthrough. The European Court of Human Rights has issued a ruling that all European countries, actually all signatories to the European Convention on Human Rights, must provide legal protection for same-sex couples. 24 of the 47 countries do now, but this is going to be a mandate to places like Russia and Turkey that have no intention of legalizing anything for same-sex couples, and often these rulings by the European Court of Human Rights are ignored.
That's not very nice.
But nonetheless, it is a standard that has been put out there, and we'll see whether it brings some into conformity.
And some citizens in Finland have filed enough signatures to, they're on the threshold of getting enough signatures to require another parliamentary debate about same-sex marriage. Now, I don't know that they would repeal it, but
well,
but this, in other words, it's not like over here where the citizens overturn what the parliament does. They can get the parliament to debate it again.
Well, it hasn't gone into effect yet. It was passed, but it doesn't go into effect until 2017.
Well, and if they get enough signatures, that would, if they get twice as many signatures as they need, then they actually can put it on hold for a longer time.
Yikes.
So, but then there's everybody saw the story about Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, but with the crying refugee in Rostock, Germany, right, who didn't want to leave because she's disabled. She's at a school for kids with disabilities. Well, there was another kid there who said, hey, I'm gay. And I'd like to know why heterosexual and homosexual relationships should be treated differently in terms of marriage and adoption. And they said Merkel sighed, repeated the party line, and then the kid goes, how many of you agree with Merkel? Really? I want to see a show of hands. That's a very clever thing to do when you're in the presence of a politician. This kid is like 13 or something. That's great.
Well, a lot of people don't want to speak up, so it's best to put it in terms of how many people agree with her as opposed to how many people agree with me. You're likely to end up with a better look. In Saudi Arabia, there is a school that had a painting on its outer walls that was rainbows. Now, no one is quite sure why. You know, around the world, the rainbow means various things, but there it was, all painted with rainbows. And the government freaked out and fined the school $25,000 for having rainbows on the outside, and repainted the school, much less attractive, and arrested the director.
They call it marketing for homosexuality, which is correct. And that's what it is here. If you live in Chelsea, they put a rainbow flag on, they want your business. These are the Saudi morality police, and they go after gay people for using hookup apps and things, and they flog gay people and trans people there routinely.
To get a different picture, I want you to go to YouTube, and I want you to search Nothing But Pride, and you will find a video there, Nothing But Pride. We got a Chiron that'll tell you that. Go to YouTube, Nothing But Pride. It is a video, a totally charming little video made by activists in Sri Lanka, where homosexuality is still outlawed completely. But they are
as it was in Alabama a few years ago.
They are dancing in the streets with rainbow flags and signs and balloons and just happy and free and refusing to be kept down. And it is really charming, but doesn't really translate for our podcast listeners. So that's why I'm not showing it. But Nothing But Pride on YouTube.
Right. In Italy, the High Court there said that surgery is not necessary for a person to have their gender change registered. The case was brought by a trans person living as a woman for 25 years who got up to was scheduled some surgery and then said, I really don't want to have surgery. So now...
Yeah, and the other thing they used to require is sterilization. And this court order said you don't have to do that either. And in Kiev, Ukraine, a court there said transgender people don't need surgery to mark a gender change.
And Ireland passed one of the most progressive gender identity laws, removing the provision that the doctor has to sign off on the legal change in gender identity. And it should go into effect by the end of the summer. I don't know what they're waiting for, but they do things a little more slowly there. They still don't actually have same-sex marriage there yet.
We would give you the details on how marriage is advancing in Mexico, but it is so complicated that all I will tell you is marriage is advancing in Mexico.
And the federal Congress has called on the states to legislate same-sex marriage at this point.
Well, they have this system where you have to have a certain number of them take place state by state, and then blah, blah, blah.
It's coming.
And more states are letting people get married in same-sex couples without having to go through all the somersaults legally. They're making it easier, and state by state it is becoming more routine and more legal, but they are making great strides.
On the other hand, in Thailand, a surrogate mom who was not related to the baby that she bore won't let the American dad and his Spanish husband leave with the child. So they've gone into hiding with the girl in Bangkok. The mom says they're not ordinary family. They're not an ordinary family, and she worries for the child. Thailand has now banned surrogacy entirely, partly because of cases like this. It's a mess.
It's an old story.
It's
difficult, and I feel sorry for same-sex couples who are trying to employ this method and finding it so
And we got
difficult.
a long way to go in the Philippines. 84% there oppose same-sex marriage.
Whoops.
84%.
Yeah.
That's like the votes that we used to have in Mississippi and Alabama on those things, but they're changing.
They are.
All right.
Now,
I think we're good.
Yes, on international news. Moving on to AIDS news. Now, there are some AIDS headlines this week because they are having the International AIDS Society meeting in Vancouver, Canada. And this is where lots of researchers, doctors, activists come together. And so people tend to put out their reports in connection with this and other annual meetings. So a couple of headlines I noted. One is that it's actually further information on studies that have been coming out periodically that immediate treatment works. That no matter when you are diagnosed in terms of your T-cell count or how long you've been infected, as soon as you are diagnosed as having HIV, you should go on treatment because you will be in better health. And that has been a question, when to start treatment. And in fact, this is called the START trial, which is an acronym for something. But the conclusion seems to be, after years and years and years of studying this in various ways, that immediate treatment is the best answer. And the problem is, of course, that there isn't funding for this worldwide. It's one thing, not to mention people actually getting tested and finding out that they have HIV. We still are miles away from doing that universally.
No, we're ending AIDS in New York in 2020 and internationally in 2030. That was what they were telling us 6 months ago.
And another study out of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill says if you are on treatment and you take your medicine consistently to the point where you have undetectable virus, they have seen absolutely zero transmission in their study for people who are on treatment consistently.
That's what they said.
Maybe at the very beginning when they start treatment, but once it settles in.
Reliably, take the drugs reliably over a period of time and you won't be able to transmit the virus. I wonder if
Although they're not willing to tell people to stop using condoms, because that's always the fallback.
All right, entertainment news.
Yes.
Well, I did see Colin Quinn. Now, the former Saturday Night Live star, and he did a thing called Unconstitutional about the history of the United States, and something called A Long Short Story about the history of the world. And now he's just down to New York City. That's what it's called, A New York Story, at the Cherry Lane. And it's under the direction of Jerry Seinfeld, which could be, maybe was part of the problem with this. It comes across as a weak, unfunny defense of ethnic jokes. And the hardcore Quinn fans who were there laughed uproariously and would probably laugh at him reading the phone book, but not me.
So there. But you may want
And
to...
I like him.
Well, okay, but you can stay home on Sunday night or set your DVR because finally the Caitlyn Jenner series on E, I Am Kate, which will walk you through her transition in this reality show. You know, we keep hearing these news reports of she's in New York at Pride, she's in clubs in Hollywood. It's all for the TV show. They have needed to have some way to illustrate her life, and so they've been taking her out all over the place and with cameras. So this will all finally play out in a multi-part series on E! Entertainment Network starting Sunday night, this Sunday night at 8 p.m. I Am Kate.
I save most of my best stuff for television. I went to see a live show called Broadway Stands Up for Freedom. It was a benefit for the NYCLU, and Edie Windsor was there, who, of course, they handled her case. And it was, they ran a film, and we're not showing it to you because it has some titles on it, which don't translate again for our podcast. But check it out on YouTube. It's just go to Broadway Stands Up for Freedom, and it'll come up. And our old friend Julie Halston, they're all there talking about what does civil liberties mean to you? Who are your heroes? Sing us a freedom song, that kind of stuff. And it was very funny, and it was quite touching.
By the way, if you want to carry us with you around town as an audio podcast on your little device, go to our website, gayusatv.org, where you can access the podcast, or to iTunes, or just write to Andy Hum at andyhum@aol.com, and he'll give you the details of how to hook into us.
I will give you the direct links to these YouTube videos so you don't have to search for them.
And you can watch us on YouTube at any time. So
you can like us on Facebook if you like.
All access all the time. I sat at my computer the other night and watched a movie that is being released this weekend, The Outrageous Sophie Tucker.
What is it?
It's the life story of Sophie Tucker.
Is.
But it's basically, these two people wrote a biography of Sophie Tucker. They basically made a vanity production of themselves talking about Sophie Tucker. Some of it is a little, therefore, not entertaining, but she kept scrapbooks of everything in her life. So they had a mile of material here. And some of it is Barbara Walters talking about her.
They used Bette Midler?
They had a tiny snippet of Bette Midler.
Bette Midler revived Sophie Tucker jokes.
I know. I sat through many Bette Midler performances hearing them all.
Soph, I said to myself, Soph? Am I right?
And what'd she say? Eddie, leave me alone. Get off my back. No. That was the big punchline. But here's the thing. There are a couple of nuggets in this. One is your old friend Bruce Valanche has a soundbite or two. Tony Bennett talks about her a lot. She appeared at Barbara Walters' father's nightclub a lot, so Barbara Walters knew her pretty well.
The last of the Red Hot Mamas, right?
She was and she was a mentor to Judy Garland, which is an interesting part of this. But she was a great friend of J. Edgar Hoover and Clyde Tolson.
Yes, and what did she have to say about them?
Well, she loved them. And you see on the screen all these notes from J. Edgar Hoover to her saying, Clyde and I were so happy to entertain you, and it was a great dinner, and we had a great time. And so then this one guy, there's this quote from this one guy, some guy named Green, who was a great friend of hers, who tells the story of being seated between Sophie Tucker and J. Edgar Hoover at some event. And I'm going to read this because this is the exact quote. He says, J. Edgar Hoover leaned over to him, and he was right there, he heard this whole thing, and says to Sophie Tucker, when you're done with that dress, can I have it?
Oh, really?
Yes. And it was all confirming the cross-dressing stories.
Well, wait a minute. The cross-dressing story on J. Edgar Hoover was single-sourced from one woman.
Oh, no, not here. It's all in this movie.
Before this.
Yeah.
And she was suspect, so I wasn't sure about it. I mean...
Absolutely confirmed in this movie. If you have any question, you can see the outrageous Sophie Tucker. And then the other thing is, Sophie Tucker had 3 husbands fairly early on, none of which were terribly successful, and she ended up with a lot of girlfriends. And that's all in this movie. And they're all named, and pictures of them are shown. It's all from the scrapbooks. So
take a trip down memory lane, kids.
A lot of it comes in really in the last 20 minutes of the movie. But I perked up when I saw this stuff.
Love to see it.
Yeah.
How about those Emmy nominations?
How about them?
Well, a lot of LGBT content. Orange is the New Black, Modern Family, Jeffrey Tambor in Transparent, Lily Tomlin in Grace and Frankie, Alan Cumming in The Good Wife, Uzo Aduba in Orange is the New Black, Titus Burgess in The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, Bessie is nominated, Dennis O'Hare for American Horror Story, also Sarah Paulson for that, Jane Lynch for Hollywood Game Night, and The Case Against Prop 8, not our favorite film, but it was nominated for documentary special.
Per usual, the Emmys are going to be a very... do we know when they are and who's hosting them?
I don't know. Anybody know? No.
You have to take notes on these things.
Oh, the Emmys, it's just like, there it is. I think it's usually in September.
No, I'm sure it must be...
in August?
Oh, wait, we're already in July, aren't we? So, yeah, it could be.
It's campaign season.
Now, do we want to talk about Donald Trump?
Go ahead. It's what everybody else is talking about.
I know. And
he's anti-gay.
Yes, very. And
I'm traditional on marriage. One woman at a time.
And Jake Tapper tried to attack him on this, or say...
Because he's had 3 wives.
Exactly. And how can you claim that you're occupying some moral high ground when you've had 3 wives? You say you're for traditional marriage. How traditional are you when you've had these 3 wives? And then he goes into this thing about, well, they were great women, and I wasn't a great husband, but I'm a great father, and I'm the greatest, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, God.
Well, I just think that people tend to try to catch straight people as hypocrites if they're against same-sex marriage because they've been divorced or had affairs. And I think it's not analogous, and none of those straight people see it as analogous.
Well, it's like the bakers who will bake cakes for divorced people, but not for gay couples. But I just think that's because of homophobia.
It is about homophobia, and that's what I'm saying. It is a homophobic analysis that says that gay people are illegitimate, sinful, disgusting, whatever. So anything I do as a heterosexual has nothing to do with this analysis of homosexuality.
Because I'm normal.
Exactly. So sure, I may have all these experiences of whatever, divorce or adultery or whatever, but that has nothing to do with the fact you can't make a comparison. And I think we have to understand that is.
I do understand that's the way they think. But I mean, you think this country can elect a demagogue? I would have to be in a pretty bad mood to do so. But demagogues do get elected sometimes.
It's scary, and we'll see the debate on August 6th and see where that brings us.
And we'll see you next week with any luck. Thank you for being with us.
Bye-bye.